Hello friends, Tanya here for Trinity Stamps, and today I am creating an elegant wedding card in a 5x7 format. We're going to start with a piece of cardstock, and watercolor cardstock, and some Nuvo Shimmer Mist powders, the Atlanta Burst and the Jade Fountain. Now the best way to use these powders is to just tap on the bottom of the bottle as you get them out onto the paper. Now you can use this directly into water on your paper, or you can add a spray of water over the top after you've put the dry powders down. And the absolute best way to do this is to now let your paper dry naturally. Of course, I'm not that patient. So after I spritzed that all, and I happened to use some pearlized water, which is perfect pearls in water, but you could use plain water. There is lots of shimmer in this. And then I heat set it with my heat gun, and that did result in some harsh lines. However, I made it work. Next, I pulled out the Happily Ever After stamp set, and I took the main image from that stamp set, and I'm inking it up with Juicy embossing or ink. And as usual, I go a little overboard with the number of times that I ink up this image. I think I did it 3 times with the embossing ink, and I'm going to heat emboss this with some silver. I think this is called sterling silver. It's an old embossing powder from my stash, but I will have linked below a nice silver embossing powder. And I'm going to heat set that with my heat tool. And look at how beautiful that is. I do take the coordinating die from the Stamp and Die set, the Happily Ever After Stamp and Die set. And I'm going to secure it with some of the Best Ever craft tape. And I'll run that through my die cutting machine. And there is our beautiful stamped and watercolored piece. Next, we're going to take the oval foliage die. This came out in the latest release from Trinity Stamps, and it is gorgeous. I die cut it with some shimmery white cardstock. And next, I'm going to take the Summer Blooms stamp set. Gorgeous. It came out in a kit last year, and I am so glad it's back in the shop because I love this stamp set. It is so versatile. We use florals in so many things, and these are great floral images. I am stamping them again in the Juicy embossing ink on a piece of cardstock. I believe this is a half sheet of cardstock, which is 5.5 by 8.5 inches. And I'm stamping it all over the cardstock. I'm creating a pattern, and I'm kind of alternating how I stamp them down so they're not all in the same direction and they're scattered fairly evenly across the cardstock. I would not call this a random pattern because there is definitely a pattern here. I'm also going to use a little sprig image to fill in some of the wider blank spaces in this pattern. And I know you really can't see what's going on this paper very well, but it's going to all light up when we get the embossing powder on it. I'm using one of my favorite embossing powders. This is the Hero Arts White Satin Pearl, and I'm sprinkling that over this entire piece of cardstock that I've created the pattern on. Now this is much larger than I will need ultimately, but I like to make a bigger piece than I need so that I can lay my die on here or use my trimmer to cut out exactly the part of the pattern that worked out the best. And you can see how that white satin pearl creates an elegant tone-on-tone classed up background. I just love it. Now I'm taking the components that I've already created and laying them on the pattern paper to decide where I want them placed, and I decide that I want a little bit of gray darkness in the center of that oval foliage die. So I took out my Pumice Stone Distress Oxide ink, and I'm using a blender brush to lightly apply some color in the center of this pattern. Then I'm going to use a dry cloth to buff off some of the excess ink so that those flowers will glow through the pattern again. Now, this next thing that I tried doesn't actually seem to make any real difference, so you could certainly skip that. I spritzed some pearlized water on it, and checking my placement again, I'm going to set that aside to dry. Next, I pull out the Happily Ever After sentiment from the same named stamp set and a piece of light gray cardstock from my stash, and I'm going to ink that up with some embossing ink, some juicy embossing ink. And again, I do it twice. I know that after I did that background, I really only need to stamp it once. It's kind of a compulsion, I think. Then I apply that same silver embossing powder, and we'll heat set that to get our beautiful sentiment. I love this script on this die, or excuse me, on this stamped sentiment. It's very different than most of the other fonts that I've been seeing lately, and I love variety. And one of the amazing things with this stamp set is each word has an individual die, so you can configure these however you would like on your card or your project. So I've die cut the first two of those words, and then I'll die cut the third. The words are close enough together that you can't actually lay all of the dies down at once to die cut them. I suppose you wouldn't want them further apart if you were going to stamp them without die cutting them. I also die cut two more of each of these word dies, and I'm going to layer them up. And I did use the same cardstock for all of these different layers. I wanted that to all be the same color. I didn't want there to be a colored top layer and two white bottom layers for dimension. I just wanted that look of unity by having, or that consistency of having the same color for each of the layers. And that's all three of those words. Next, we're going to cut down our panel to the size that we want, and I pulled out my Modern Embossed A7 stack die set, and I'm using the third from the largest die to create our layer to go on our 5x7 card. I'm going to use some Barely Art Precision Glue here to glue this directly down onto the heavyweight white cardstock base. This started out as a piece of 10-inch by 7-inch cardstock scored in the middle at 5 inches to create our 5x7 card base. Now that I have that under my MISTI to add some weight that did have a little warping, to make that lay nice and flat, I am going to go on and work on some of the other elements of the card. I did die cut two more layers of the couple from this stamp set, and I'm layering those behind our beautifully watercolored with the Nuvo Shimmer color, or Nuvo Shimmer powders. And I am going to add the oval foliage frame here directly to the pattern paper on the front of the card, just adding a line of glue all the way around that solid area in the center of the frame, and adding dots of glue in some of the thicker segments of the foliage part. I'll use a heavyweight block to hold that down to dry on our embossing. That makes it a little more difficult because the embossing is not porous. And then we'll take our couple and place those on the card. Now again, my clear block helps add that weight, but I'm also still able to look through it and help plan my card. I needed to adjust the position of our couple before I adhere the happily part of our sentiment, and we're just going to tuck this in over the frame but next to the couple. And then we have the ever part of the sentiment, and I toyed around with placement of that particular word, and then after I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to adhere that, but it actually turns out pretty good. I maybe should have just followed the curve of her dress, but this works. I think there are a variety of ways this could turn out. I wanted to also decorate the inside of the card, so I took that same floral stamp from Summer Blooms and stamped it on what was left of that watercolored cardstock. That is watercolor cardstock, so it's a little heavier. And I stamped it with clear embossing ink again, and I added the silver embossing powder so it would match with the rest of the card. I'm going to heat set that here quickly, and then I will die cut it with the coordinating die. And this die is small enough to go through your Sidekick. If you have one of those smaller die cutting machines, this will go through it. It's nice to have a small die cutting machine right on your desk. I love that. And there have been a few bigger die cut machines that are small ones to fit on your desk, so you don't have to leave your desk. Now I'm fussing with where I want to place that, and I took this ombre ink pad from Hero Arts, which is pretty dry. It might be on its last legs. And I stamped that on the inside of the card. I wanted this all to match that silver feeling. And I stamped that a few times to get a nice solid image. And it says, "Congratulations to the new Mr. and Mrs." And we'll adhere our little watercolored rose on the inside of the card. Next up, I want to add some of these glitzy gray baubles. They are so pretty. They have this beautiful luminescent quality to them. And again, my favorite way to add these now, so I don't fuss too much with placement, is add dabs of glue, set in groupings of 3 most of the time, just because that's the most pleasing to the eye. And I am going to just grab various sizes of these beautiful baubles to the card front using my pickup stick. This pickup stick is invaluable. You can pick up embellishments and different pieces of tiny cardstock. It's fantastic. The other end has a pokey tool. It's not quite as pokey as some of the others, so if you're looking for a duller look or a duller pokey tool, that is definitely the ticket. My Trinity tray does not normally fail me, but I was a little bit sloppy with tipping my embellishments back into my container. Here we have the completed card. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Is it elegant enough? I love that color that it created with the shimmer powders. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you aren't subscribed to this channel, please do that now. It really helps the channel build. If you are interested in any of the products I use today, please check that description box below. And until next time, here are a couple more videos I thought you might enjoy. Until next time, bye-bye.